You're listening to Empowering Testimonies of Faith with Coach Jeff Connors. Join Coach C, USA Strength and Conditioning Hall of Famer and Certified Health and Life Coach every Monday night at 7 for Empowering Testimonies of Faith as diverse individuals from various professions share their personal journey, leading them to spiritual strength through surrendering themselves to Christ. Coach Connors aspires to influence others to choose a healthy threefold lifestyle with spirituality as the powerful foundation. Now, here is Coach Connors.
Welcome to Empowering Testimonies of Faith with Jeff Connors. Tonight, our distinguished guest is 7-time Muay Thai kickboxing champion, including 2 world titles and 4 North American titles, and long-distance traveler by foot and paddleboard, holding several world records in those categories, Tom Quitproof Jones. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. How are you, Jeff?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Very excited about this. And my primary objective in this particular show would be to find out what lit a fire in Tom Jones' heart and figure out how we might pass that on to other people, because you're definitely one of the most amazing people I've ever met. I'll just tell you that right up front. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that you were a protege of Chuck Norris, correct?
I still am. Yes, sir. 100%. And thanks for having me, Jeff. It's an honor to be on your show and, reaching out and trying to motivate, educate, and inspire people, because that's what it's all about.
No doubt. What I want to do is I want to start with what I call the big MOFA, the big MOFA, the big motivating factor. And that would be the why underneath the why. Some people talk about the why, and we're going to talk about the why underneath the why. And, I want to start there with your experience in the home, which I'm a little familiar with by listening to some of your other podcasts, which was a brutal experience. And obviously there are other children out there in the same situation. So if you would just share that experience to whatever extent you want to, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. I mean, my childhood was pretty much a dumpster fire. And I was removed from my home when I was 12 years old for child abuse. My father had cancer, kidney disease, and tuberculosis, and my mother was clinically insane. So my father really was very ill, and he had many challenges that I would never want to face. My mother was not available to me most of my life. She was pretty catatonic, or going into or coming out of a mental hospital for either trying to kill herself or thinking that God told her to kill her 3 kids and then herself. So my father was physically abusive. My mother was mentally unavailable and emotionally unavailable. So father beat me real bad one day. Somebody called the police. Police showed up. It was obvious what was going on. They removed me from the home. They made me a ward of the state, which basically meant that the state removed custody of me from my parents and assumed custody of me. They placed me in a children's home to be raised. The children's home, unfortunately, was run by pedophiles. So I had a new predator to deal with. And when I was 17, I ran away from the children's home and I joined the United States Marine Corps. So that's sort of my childhood. And, because of not being able to cope with a lot of situations, I ended up having some real struggles throughout my life. And that included drug addiction and rehab for that. Also have had many great triumphs, but until really I found God, so to speak, or higher power, and got some faith and a power that was greater than myself, outside of myself, behind me, things really didn't start to change. Although that changed because of doing good for children that were just like me. So that's sort of the recap of my childhood.
Yeah, so I trained Special Ops Marines for about 7 or 8 months down at Stone Bay, Sneed's Ferry near Jacksonville, North Carolina, not too far from where I live. That was after I got out of collegiate coaching. And I was able to, during the time I was involved with collegiate coaching, to be able to meet Colonel George Bristol, who wrote a book called Bristol's Bastards. And Colonel Bristol wrote the intro to one of my books, Collegiate Battlefield. But I didn't know if you had ever heard of him.
I have, actually. And the Marine Corps was a great parent. It was the first time in my life I was rewarded with something positive for doing something positive. And I learned leadership traits like honesty, integrity, tact, esprit de corps, doing something for something or someone greater than yourself, and serving and learn service and so on. So the Marine Corps was my first experience with real structure and real guidance and people that meant what they said and said what they meant.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're familiar with J.J. Did Top Buckle, which are the first letter of all the Marine Corps leadership principles. I put those in the book. But my favorite quote is from the Marine Corps Warfighting Skills Manual, and that is, the chief incalculable in warfare is the human will. So I think you've represented that pretty well. And can you talk about, Go ahead. Can you talk a little bit about those awards you got from the Marine Corps? Was that during boot camp?
Yeah, I graduated top of my class. I was series honorman, so I graduated number 1 out of everybody. I had a good experience in the Marine Corps, and it was a really positive experience in my life. It was the first positive experience in my life that I had. And I met Chuck Norris when I was stationed in Beaufort, South Carolina. And the only martial arts school in town was a Chuck Norris school. So I joined that, and I became very friendly with the people that ran that school and who were enrolled in that school. And I won a big karate tournament called the Battle of Atlanta, and I got to meet Chuck there. And it was amazing. I always looked up to him. And little did I know when I got out of the Marine Corps that I'd start working for him and start being one of his training partners. And that was an amazing experience as well.
Yeah, and I want to get into that a little bit more, but I want to go back a little bit to, when you were, I guess, 17, and somewhere around there. And did you always feel this intrinsic will to fight and overcome adversity? When you were when you were a child, did you experience a lot of fear and anger, or a combination of the both? Or how did this fire start to get built up inside you?
Of course, I had a tremendous amount of fear and anger, and I don't know that I just fought out of anger, and I hung in there out of anger and resentment. And it was just a survival mechanism, kind of looking back on it. It was just a way to survive. I fought most every day, if not once, more than one time. When I got it, and it was always fearful. It was always angry. And childhood was, I had every reason that a person would have to be standing behind your loved one at a ready, tell her to do horrible things to them and feel great about it. But meeting Chuck Norris and having access to him and having him as a role model really did change my life. And one of the things that Chuck Norris did that was very powerful and impacted me greatly is that he was a good man that did things for other people. and I got to see that constantly. So that rubbed off on me, and I didn't know it at the time that it rubbed off on me, but it did rub off on me. So yeah, I mean, the fire inside of me started in the children's home, but it was a survival fire. It wasn't a giving back fire, and it morphed into a giving back fire. And that was divine intervention. I think it 100% was. So, when I got out of the Marine Corps, I started working with Chuck Norris and training with him, and watched how a good, healthy man operated. In the Marine Corps, I got a lot of exposure to strong men, to healthy men, men that had a purpose, men that were honest, that had integrity, they had tact, a lot of things that I did not have available to me in my childhood, I picked up while I was in the Marine Corps, and certainly with Chuck Norris. Now, I was very lucky that I was in fist fighting, I can tell you for sure. Otherwise, I'm convinced I would have gone to prison or worse. So I had a place to take out my anger and my frustration and my resentment and so on, and, make a living doing it, fighting professionally. So I was very fortunate, and it didn't start out that way. I wanted to see my child born when I was in the Marine Corps, and they had fighting. I was stationed overseas, and they had fighting out in town where it was winner take all, which was all the money, and loser take a beating, which was pretty self-explanatory. So I won enough money to have my wife flown out and have my daughter born overseas and watch my daughter born. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I was still angry and so on, and I didn't really assimilate well to civilian life. And I thought to myself, I'm just going to go back and do that fighting thing. And that's what I did. That's how that started.
Gotcha.
I mean, I joke about it. I say, the fighting thing was amazing. I said, first they came up and said, hey, want to do this fighting thing? And I'm all, tell me about it. And they're like, well, there's only one opponent. And I was like, that's a lot better than the children's home. And they said, yeah, there's a third person in the ring called a referee. I go, what does the referee do? They'll stop it if it gets bad. I go, they stop it? Other people don't jump in and try to kick your teeth in and stuff? They go, no, they stop the fight. I was like, wow, that's way better than the children's home. And they said, here's the deal clincher right here. They'll pay you for it. I said, pay me for it? Huh, sign me up. I'm in.
That's awesome, man.
But I was well equipped to fight. I mean, by the time I got in the ring physically, I easily had 75, 100 fights under my belt just fighting, so, and I had been in martial arts my whole life. I'd been in martial arts since I was 3 years old. And in the Marine Corps, you tend to either gravitate to training and being a physical fitness nut, or you gravitate to hanging out with the guys and throwing back beers and so on. But I was very disciplined when I was in the Marine Corps. I trained constantly in martial arts. I think it was a great outlet for anger at the time. And like I said, when I got out, I was fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. Although every time they raised my hand was the only time it felt good for a moment. And then I would go back into a place where I wasn't fulfilled or happy.
Gotcha. Well, the one thing I do want to mention at this point, from a spiritual standpoint, the Apostle Paul said that evil is the mystery of iniquity. And when we think about that a little bit, and I still, I believe that every day of my life and everyone's life is a spiritual battle, because, I believe the enemy's out there. And if you don't start your day getting in the Word and get into putting on the armor of God, the sword of which is the only offensive weapon, which is the Word, I think you're going to be vulnerable. So,
well, God works in very interesting ways. He saved me from jail, and he gave me an outlet, which is still fighting, although it was a much more healthy outlet than doing horrible things to people and horrible things in society. And it opened doors and got me access to people that I would have never been able to get access to, that were also good role models like Chuck Norris and some other people that I bodyguarded that changed my life dramatically. And because of that, I bodyguarded the guy that owned the largest computer memory vending company in the world. The company is called Viking Components. The guy's name was Glenn McCusker. Glenn had celebrities that worked for him, like Reggie Jackson, Joe Montana, race car driver Jacques Villeneuve, that he would send out to make appearances on the company's behalf. And make a long story short, he asked me to go to a children's home that was in my area and take a tour of the children's home and make an appearance. And I didn't want to do it because I had turned my back on that completely when I ran away from it. I took a tour of that home, and by the end of the day, I knew that I had to do something to help children that were like myself, but I didn't know what. Those kids wanted a playground, and they needed to raise money for the playground. And this was in 1998. And I was running for a title fight, and I was trying to figure out what I could possibly do to help these kids get money for a playground. And I just had an epiphany that if I ran a long way on foot, and I would be able to, people would ask me why are you doing that? And I'm talking about a marathon a day, 26.2 miles a day, every single day, that people are going, why in the heck are you doing that? And that would give me an opportunity to talk about these type of kids, what they're going through, and be able to help me raise money for them to have a playground that they wanted. And I can tell you, Jeff, that I did that. In 1998, I ran from Oregon to Mexico on foot and raised enough money. I helped buy the playground. I didn't raise enough money to buy it outright myself, but I helped. And when those kids started playing on that playground, and we dedicated that playground, for the first time, I really felt my life was changed forever, Jeff. I was enriched. God blessed me. God touched me that day. And I've not done anything different since. I've used my athletic ability to help champion worthwhile causes and raise money for worthwhile causes since 1998.
Yeah, so since you mentioned it, I'm going to go ahead and ask you about your run across America. Running
Which
a
time?
marathon.
I run twice. I've done it twice.
Okay. Now, did you break the record the second time, or?
No, the running was only running records. The first time I ran from my home in Huntington Beach, California to New York City, and that was 120 consecutive marathons. So that was a marathon a day, every single day, 26.2 miles a day, every day for 120 days. 121st day, I ran the New York Marathon, and people ask me, how was that done? How can anyone do that? And I have a couple things to say about it. One is it's a gift from God. That's how somebody can do it. It's a gift. Now that's the gift, but the blessing is to be able to take that gift and share it with others and use that wonderful ability that God gave me to benefit something or someone besides myself. And the other part of that is the way that you do it is you make your why strong enough. So I was stopping at children's homes along my route. Every time I ran, I stopped at children's homes along my route, and I would share my story. And I would literally watch these kids, some of these kids transform right in front of my face. And so my why was just to make it to the next children's home. That was my why. And when I ran across the country the first time, I partnered with a radio show host, Dr. Norris, and she had bags that were duffel bags that had goods that were donated by her listeners, like water bottles, books, pencils, coloring books, and so on, that they would give kids that were removed from their home like I was, because when you're removed from your home like I was, they take everything from you. So she called them my stuff bags, and I handed out about 10,000 of those along my route when I ran across the country. And I stopped and I talked at children's homes along the way, and that was my why. So if your why is strong enough, the how, you'll figure it out.
Totally incredible. What I wanted to ask you was, I just wanted to know if you had a team, what you did kind of like for food, where you stayed, who funded it?
So how, the logistics that's really where it's either won or lost. Obviously, you got to take the steps and you got to run. But I have a team of about 5 people that go with me. And the way that I figured out how to do it was, I was like, how am I going to do this? And then literally the TV show MASH is playing. And so I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to do this logistically, and they're getting bombed. And that's where I learned what MASH stands for. It stands for Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. So when they're getting bombed, they just pack up the whole shebang and move it to a safer place. And I was like, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I got a motorhome and I used it as base camp. And I would go in a pace car, would shuttle me to my start line, and wherever I finished, they would shuttle me back to the motorhome. We would run 100 miles past the motorhome, leapfrog the motorhome another 100 miles, and do that all over again. So we would buy food at local supermarkets. I have a guy that's been with me for 27 years. He's an Asian guy that was my trainer in fighting. He does chiropractic, acupuncture, and I've had a bunch of people try to steal him because he cooks so good. It's absolutely amazing. So when I'm not suffering, I can tell you one thing, Jeff, I'm living like a king.
That's awesome.
So that's how it's done logistically. And then sometimes I would run 26.2 miles and drive 50, 75 miles to a children's facility and sit there with the kids, share my story, do motivational speaking, talk with the kids, answer questions, hand out the My Stuff bags, drive 7,500 miles back to the motorhome, and do it all over again the next day. Because
Wow.
There's a difference between being rich and enriched, Jeff. Okay. And that doesn't mean that you can't be both, but I can tell you one thing, and God has truly blessed me. And I found enrichment by helping other people. That's being enriched. There's a difference between traveling and being worldly. Doesn't mean you can't be both either. But I can tell you something, that using a gift that God gave you to help other people, in my opinion, there is no better calling or feeling in the world than that.
I hear you.
So I had my North Star. I found my North in my program and in my book. The first chapter is called The Compass and Catalyst, right? Where's your compass pointed? What's the mission statement for your life? That's what we help people do. Is the mission statement for my life is to become the best integrated version of myself I can become in my lifetime in service to others. The mission statement of my company is the more people that we can figure out how to help in our life, the more blessed and successful we'll be. Right. So when I'm in meetings and people start talking about making money, I'm like, hey, pump the brakes. We're in the business of helping people. Because if we help people, God will bless us. Money will rain from the sky and a whole lot more.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I wanted to get back to what I had heard or what I had read. I can't remember, but when you went to Thailand and, as a strength and conditioning coach for many years, I guess you could say that I was one of those old school guys, and I was a person who believed that you could improve toughness. And, so I really believe that if I take people through tough things, they'll get tougher. Pretty simple. And so your experience in Thailand seemed to be a lesson in toughness. Is that true?
Sure. It's a crucible, right? You heat something up, just like metal, they heat it up, put it under stress, challenge it, right? And they take it out and they pound it and they put it back in the fire and they take it out and they pound it. Next thing you know, they got a beautiful sharp sword. It's the same thing with human beings. I believe that, and there's a chapter in my book called The Adversity and the Opportunity. I believe that adversity is the pathway to opportunity. That's the crucible. That's the path to success. God put challenge in front of us for a reason, so that we grow and that we find him and that we prosper. That's the plan, right? So yeah, you can make somebody plenty tough by putting them under pressure.
So, what did you get out of your visit to Thailand in relationship to your skills, toughness, having to fit in or whatever? I mean, tell me a little bit about that.
Thailand was a whole different level. It's like that, Muay Thai means the sport of kings. So what they would do is in old times in Thailand, village A would put a fighter up, village B would put a fighter up, and they would fight for the king's entertainment. So whoever won would be the hero forevermore. Their family would be out of poverty. And whoever lost, if they fought well, they weren't humiliated, but if they didn't, they'd kick them out of the village. So it's next level stuff. So, I wanted to jump into the fire, and I got everything I wanted. I can tell you one thing, but when I came back to the United States, I'd win 5 or 6 fights in a row, and then I'd go right back to Thailand, stay there for like anywhere from 3 to 6 months, train, come back, win several fights, go back. People weren't doing that at that time. Now a lot of people do that, but at the time I started doing it, I was one of the very first Western people to go there. And at first I got sold into slavery. I got sent there. I got there at 2:00 in the morning. This guy shows up, real small guy. He's got one eye that moves around, wanders, and one eye that's locked on me. It's got to be like 2:00 in the morning. He says, well, I need all of the money, and I'll be back at 5:00 in the morning to get you. And I was like, well, why can't I give all your money at 5:00 in the morning? He's no, I need it now. So anyway, I gave the guy the money. He oddly enough, he showed up at 5 in the morning, took me to a camp where no one spoke English. The camp was backed up to a restaurant, and they just had me work in the restaurant. And I was like, I want to punch and stuff, and they're like, what? And so anyway, they let me punch a little bit and then take me back to the restaurant. I was like, this must be wax on, wax off or something. So anyway, make a long story short, I got ill because I had some duck soup and the water made me super ill. So 2 days later, they took me to the physician. The physician looked at me and goes, listening to the Thai guys, looks at me, listen to the Thai guys, looked at me. He goes, why are you here? And I go, why am I here? I'm here to learn Thai boxing. And so anyway, what happened was the guy just took most of my money, gave them a little bit of money, and goes, I'll put him to work in the restaurant. And so anyway, when they found out, oh, you want to learn Thai boxing? That's why you're here? Boy, did things change. And they have tough regimen, doesn't even come close to cutting it. So I stayed there for, I think, 2 months, maybe 3, came home, won 3 or 4 fights. I came back, I knocked on the door, I go, hey, I'm back. And they're like, you're back? I was like, yeah, they thought they punished me away.
So, educate me. I was a football guy. So tell me a little bit about, is there a difference between kickboxing and Thai kickboxing or?
Yes. Kickboxing is kicks above the waist. Thai boxing, you can kick on the legs, you can knee, you can elbow, and you can clinch. So that's the difference. And leg kicks are brutal, knees are brutal, elbows are brutal, and that's commonplace now, but then it wasn't, because kickboxing, which we had in the United States, was more Queensberry rules, right? You had to kick above the waist, and there was boxing, and still it was, respectable. There's nothing not respectable about it. But when you add in the leg kicks, the knees, the elbows, and the clinching, it's brutal. And the training was in the morning, we ran, then we slept during the day until the afternoon, and then we did intense mitt training, which means that one person holds the pads and you kick and punch them. Did bag work, and we're talking like 300 to 500 leg kicks on each leg. Mean training, very, very intense training. And then we'd sleep. They didn't let the little kids watch TV unless it was fighting, because they didn't want them to be distracted, right? Unless it was a fight, they wouldn't let them watch TV. These people were very serious about what they were doing. And in Thailand, you can literally bring your entire family out of poverty by becoming a champion. So the little families would bring their little kids to the Thai camp and give the kid to the Thai camp in hopes that the kid was going to bring the family out of poverty. And that was what was motivating them to fight.
Yeah. So in football, you know, you got a helmet on, and you know, you get about 2 or 3 concussions now, you're done. So, you know, when I watch people fight, they got these little small gloves on. People are getting hit in the head very hard. I mean, you know, so what's the deal there? Hey, you want to do this? You know the risk. You know, because I mean, I would assume that someone could get concussed quite a bit. What's your opinion of that?
100%. 1,000,000% now in Thailand. It's not unusual by the time somebody's 18 to 20 years old to have 200, 300 fights. There was no amateur division in Thailand. When they're 7 years old, they're fighting as pros. I'm running in the first Thai camp. In second Thai camp, some people, little kids spoke English. First Thai camp, nobody spoke English. Anyway, I asked the little kid, I said, hey, how come that little kid doesn't have running shoes? The little kid looks at me and he goes, oh, that one? I go, yeah. And he goes, he don't win fight yet. So, and the concussions, oh yeah. Yeah. And I tried to start a union in fighting, but the fighters wouldn't stop fighting. It's the only sport that they have that type of contact in where there's no union. There's only protection the day of the fight. That's it. So I tried to work together with a guy to start a union in fighting. The only challenge that we had was the fighters wouldn't stop fighting.
Yeah, I mean, have you seen many fighters pass away as a result of multiple concussions?
Yeah, and I've seen plenty of fighters that are punch drunk. Yes.
Right.
Some fighters that get kicked in the leg and, you know, break their leg or their knee or whatever in ways that really can't be healed. So, yeah. You know, that's the incentive. That sport's the incentive program. You know, in football, hey, you can lose a few games and come back the next season and so on and so forth. But in fighting, if you don't train hard and you don't get it, you get dealt with for real.
Right.
You know, so it's just a different game. It's like it's fist fighting. I mean, when people tell me, hey, I'm thinking about fighting, I say I only have one question. They're like, what's that? And I go, do you like getting punched in the face for a living?
Yeah.
Because that's what you're signing up for. But I had to sledgehammer down a lot of walls and find out what my limiting beliefs were and, you know, sledgehammer those down and work my way through my personal demons to be able to get to a healthy place to operate. So, you know, that's one of the things that that's how God has ascended me to where I am now. I was telling one of my clients the other day, I had no idea when I was getting molested as a kid that someday I'd be here where I am with so much life experience and hardship and anxiety and overcoming adversity and finding, you know, opportunity in adversity. Where's the silver lining? What am I supposed to learn here? That I would be teaching and helping other people navigate their lives into better places. And that's, you know, my gift. That's what God gave me as a gift besides the athletic gift.
Yeah. So when you go out to talk to a group of kids or when you speak to a group of people, can you just give me kind of a little bit about your outline? What are the important points you hit?
Well, the important points I hit are, why do people quit? Because they run into walls, challenges, hurdles, and obstacles that they don't feel that they can negotiate or navigate. That's why people quit. And I go on to talk about, if I didn't have some of the tools that I'm going to share here with you today, I would have quit on myself 1,000,000 times over when I ran across the country 121 consecutive marathons. When I started running, it was the 4th of July in Huntington Beach. The first place I ran in July was a Mojave Desert at an average temperature of 114 degrees. Then I got to the Rocky Mountains where it was brutal, stifling humidity, and then to the plain states where there was lightning storms and raining on me. Got to the East Coast where it was snowing on me. Although I figured it out because my why was strong enough. I wanted to help kids that were like me. I wanted to inspire kids with my story, not to throw their lives away and not to do things that were terrible because they had anger and resentment. They could take that and channel that fuel into a positive direction like I was. So my why was in place. So I share some tools with them that I teach people in my program, Quitproof. And so that's sort of the trajectory of the program, and let them know that there's life after trauma. They say that 90% of us have gone through some significant trauma in our lifetime. My comment is I'd like to meet the 10% that haven't. So my book, Becoming Quitproof, is a hero's journey from tragedy to triumph. And it also is a handbook how you can navigate your way through traumatic issues that we all face in life. In other words, in the middle of the chapter, it'll stop and say, do this for yourself, X, Y, and Z. So I try to mimic and follow that book a little bit as I motivationally speak. But I define what is Quitproof. Quitproof is a mindset. Once you have that mindset, it can never be taken from you except by you. You're the only one that can remove it once you have it. And then we go into why do people quit? And then I share a little bit about my childhood. And then I go in and say, and I also bring faith into it. I've been blessed. Nobody runs 121 marathons in a row and is okay. This is the second time I run across country. I did it again when I was 60 years old. I ran 76 marathons in a row. Why? Because God gave me a gift. And I get to share that gift with other people. And that is amazing.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. I mean, totally incredible.
And it boils down, Jeff, it boils down to this. Boils down to it really, because I worked with a girl the other day who's a professional athlete, and she was sharing some struggles with me. And I said, you know something? It boils down to this. How bad do you want it? How bad do you want it?
Right.
And she said, well, what did you say if I was asking you that question? I said, my answer to that question is whatever it takes. I'll do whatever it takes. You want me to walk on glass? Light it on fire. I don't care. Whatever it takes is what I'm willing to do.
Yeah, a lot of people throw those three words around, but a lot of times they don't really know what it means. So, but evidently you do.
But I've looked for the opportunity, the adversity in the adversity, Jeff. This is a blessing. I've been blessed. And the more that I do, the more I get to bless other people. And I think that's what I want to convey to your listeners, that love is the strongest of all the virtues. And before I was fighting, there was no love at all. There was only, I wanted to hurt people, and I was angry, and I wanted to strike out, and I wanted just to hurt other people. And yay, who's next? And yes, I was becoming a great athlete, but when I used my God-given athletic ability to help other people, Jeff, and I shared the love, and God opened that part of my heart, I was enriched. I have a wonderful life. I glow like I'm not Darth Vader anymore.
That's awesome, man. I can see that glow. I can see it.
Yeah, true. There is nothing like helping other people.
No doubt. So, who was the first person to introduce you to the power of faith? Anybody in particular?
I would think Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris was a man of faith. And it's interesting, when I got done running the 121 marathons in a row, I had an interview with a Christian coalition in New York. So they brought me in there and they sat me down there. And I remember like it was yesterday. And one of the very first questions they asked me, they said, well, can you tell me about your faith? And I said, sure. I said, you can kind of consider me God's field representative. And they go, explain that. I go, sure. I said, a lot of people go and they gather in a place called church, and they have fellowship, and they do wonderful. And that's incredibly great. I love that. That's wonderful. Although I take my faith and I take it out into the community and I demonstrate it. I use my athletic ability and I run 121 marathons in a row, and I stop at children's homes along the way, and I hand out these little duffel bags, and I share my story with these kids so that they can be inspired to do great things with their life. So I'm out in the field and I'm spreading the gift that God gave me and what I feel that God wants me to give other people out in the community. So I'm the field representative. I'm the guy that knocks on your door and goes, "Hi, have you heard of God?" Yeah.
So I wanted to get into a little bit more of the more pleasurable activities. You're a stand-up waterboarding, paddleboarding, stand-up paddleboarding.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I've paddleboarded from Oregon to Mexico, and I set the world record then, the long distance record then, and then I paddleboarded from Key West to New York, and I broke my own record. And then I paddled a lake called Smith Mountain Lake in Virginia, and I set the flatwater world record. I paddled 500 miles in 16 days, and that was all for what I felt was that was environmental passion of mine. The unacceptable amount of plastic that I felt was in the waterways and in the world. So with a 6th grade education, I ended up creating curriculum. It's an environmental youth education program called RESUP, RESUP. The SUP came from Standup Paddleboard, and the RE came for Rethinking Single-Use Plastic. That's what RESUP stands for. So I started a nonprofit when I ran, and those monies went to help children. They also went to help battered women. And then I got interested in the environment. So I couldn't think of anything to do water related. And I started the stand-up paddleboarding stuff. And with very little to no experience, I paddleboarded from Oregon to Mexico and faced some very big fish that probably wanted to eat me. And so I created curriculum to teach kids that is now taught in the science classes. So with the 6th grade education, I proved that you can write curriculum and have it in schools and have teachers teach it. So I have a great program called RESUP that I started, and I needed to do something water related because I wanted to bring attention to what I felt was the unacceptable amount of plastic that was in the world's oceans. Crazy stories. Yeah. You want to talk about scared?
I think I read where you were being followed by a great white for a while. Is it?
Well, yeah, I saw great whites every day from the California-Oregon border to Point Conception, which is about 2/3 of the way down the coast. Although we did an interview with one of the world's leading authorities on great white sharks before I left. And for 40 minutes, this guy told me everything I never wanted to know about a shark. And then he looks at me, he goes, he said, come to think of it, he goes, you probably wouldn't survive the initial hit from a great white shark. And I was like, well, what was the other 44 minutes about? Like, okay. So then we started out of Crescent City, and I think it was the 2nd or 3rd day. One of the team members that I have was a strapping man. He was about 5'10", weighed about 280 pounds, just gorilla. And he's on the wave. He was a crab fisherman for 20 years. And he's on a wave runner about 10 feet away from me. And he's taking his wetsuit down, and he's got his back towards me. And so his wetsuit's coming off his back, and he starts dancing on the wave runner, and he starts going, Whitey, 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 Whitey. And I looked down, and there was a 17-foot great white shark about 3 feet underneath the wave runner doing a belly roll. And our language doesn't have words that tell you, Jeff, how scared I was. But I kept going. I didn't quit because everybody's like, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? I want to keep going because if I quit now, I'll never go back in the water as long as I live. And then we did an interview either that day or the next day. And the lady asked me, she goes, well, you've been about 100 miles down the coastline now. She said, what stands out the most? I go, where I fit in on the food chain. She goes, I came in thinking I was the apex creature until I saw my first 17-foot great white shark. And it was painfully obvious I was fish food,
Wow.
Then I had an orca come at me. I've been lost at sea. There's a bunch of fish stories that are in my book. So Becoming Quitproof.
Yeah, we're going to promote the book, and I can't wait to get my copy. But also, you went from Key West to New York City, right? A couple times.
That's right. I broke that record. So in 93 days, I paddled 1,250 miles, which was Oregon and Mexico. And then in 2010, I paddled 1,507 miles to break that record. I want to say it was 92-ish days, right in there. And that was just a whole different dynamic. The weather there on the East Coast, there's more shipwrecks on the East Coast than there are on the West Coast, even though the coastline of the West Coast is more treacherous. The weather comes in quicker on the East Coast. So I've been caught out at sea in some very mean storms. And that was the first time I experienced a lightning strike on the water, which is horrifying and electrifying. Yeah. And that year in 2010, we had record heat on the East Coast and record cold on the West Coast. So my average temperature was 110 on the water every day when I paddled from Key West to New York. It was brutal. And we did the same thing, except for we used wave runners instead of a pace car. I had a motorhome. We'd take 2 wave runners, launch them out. They'd go with me. We'd pull them back, take them to the motorhome, paddle 100 miles past the motorhome, leapfrog the motorhome 100 miles. Those were like 16, 17-hour days.
So when you paddleboarded, you were not in the intercoastal. You were in the ocean.
I was in the ocean. Yeah. I mean, I did a couple days in the intercoastal when the wind was so heavy off the east, I needed a place to hide, but 90% of it was in the ocean.
Gotcha.
And then I have a paddle. So I'm paddling close to shore, and there's a displacement of water about 10 feet right next to me, and this big mouth comes over out of the water and snaps this paddle and breaks it. It was a saltwater crocodile. Almost yanked me off my board, scared the holy bejesus out of me, and I couldn't paddle away because my paddle was broke. I couldn't drop down in the water and throw my arms in the water and paddle away. My wave runner driver, it was a girl from Poland. She's like, "I cannot help you. You are too close to shore." I'm like, "Help!" You know. There's lots of stories that go along with the ocean paddling, that's for sure. But again, my why was strong enough. I really felt that this environmental cause of plastic in the water was deadly to humans, and I had 2 little kids at the time, and I was worried about their future. So that's what got me interested in that.
Yeah. So as a strength and conditioning coach, I'm very interested in how you train, but at the same time, it seems like the venture itself is the training with regard to what you've done in relationship to running and paddleboarding. But I guess I'm more interested in. No,
that's not it, Jeff. My secret to training is cross training. Normally, I will try to get as much of variety in my training as I possibly can. And that's bike riding, that's jujitsu and martial arts, that's running, that's cycling, that's lifting weights. I try to get as much variety as I can. And so I describe it like this. If I have a deck of 52 cards and they have razor blades on each side, and I'm throwing it to the same place in your body at the same pace every time, all 52 cards, at first you'll be whack, whack. But after a while, you'll be texting, whack. You'll be phone call, smack. You know what I'm saying? So your body will get accustomed to it, and the body's amazing. It will adapt quickly and it will plateau. But if I had that same deck of cards with razor blades and I'm throwing it to a different spot every time at a different cadence and keeping you on your toes, and you have to be on your toes and reacting, and your body has to be agile and always adapting, overcoming and enduring, that's the secret of, to me, being as well-rounded of an athlete as you can possibly be.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just hit that one target all the time, and it's not long before your body adapts to that and plateaus. And then the other part of it's nutrition. How do you fuel yourself? And and then the other part of it is rest and recovery. You have to have those 3 things in place to be an ultimate athlete. And if one of them's off, then it's like a mathematical equation. They're variables, right? Your training program has to be, in my opinion, very diverse and then rest has to be a part of that training program. You have to have the right kind of fuel, and we use different fuel for different applications. When I fought, it was a different diet than when I paddleboarded, was a different diet than when I ran. Because I was trying to explain paddleboarding to my Thai trainer, and he was like, what? And I was trying to explain it. He goes, you have to show me. He couldn't understand. But then when I showed him, he goes, I know exactly how to feed you.
Okay, so if you're going to run 121 marathons, you know, in a row, and you're 12 weeks away, so what you're saying is you're just going to stick with cross training?
No, I'll be running heavy. I'll be running centric, meaning the majority of my program would be running, but I will still be cross training. Yes. And the other thing with running is you got to be able to take in about 5,000 or 6,000 calories of good food, plus drink about 1.5 gallons to 2 gallons of fluid a day. Have you seen 5,000 to 6,000 calories of good food on a table? It will take up the whole damn table. And I'm talking about your grandma's table at Thanksgiving. So I'm sitting there with my trainer saying, how in the heck are we going to eat all that? And like, how are we going to do that? How are we going to take it? He goes, you have to drink it. You have to drink it. I go, what do you mean? He goes, fruits and vegetables, we must blend and you must drink those. The meat, we must chop really good and make a powder, right? And so that your body can digest it. So we figured out how to take in those kind of calories and then drink the fruits and vegetables. I have some supplements that I take. Balance of Nature is a supplement that I take, which is just fruits and vegetables, no additives, no fillers. I really like that because with 6 tablets, I can get my daily allowance of fruits and vegetables, and whatever I do on top of that is icing on the cake. I have some other supplements that I take. Neutronics is another one that I take. So I look for things that help me. Layered superfoods is another one. There's some products from Shackley that are really good. And so I look for these products that can help me with my fuel and then my rest and recovery. You got to be able to get your sleep and recover and get the body work and chiropractic and acupuncture if you need it. So those 3 things you need to do. You need to train, you need to fuel yourself correctly for whatever you're doing, and you need the rest and recovery. But yes, and when I was paddleboarding, as I got closer to the event, the majority of what I was doing was paddling, but I always keep cross training, always.
Yeah, I would think grip and back strength is pretty important to that too.
Well, in paddleboarding, think about it. In paddleboarding, you're on an unstable platform, Jeff. So you as a trainer will appreciate this. Every muscle in your body is firing to keep you upright on an unstable platform. So your eyebrows are firing. You know what I mean? So I mean, and the only reason when I paddled from Oregon to Mexico, people would want to paddle with me, but we would end up rescuing most of those people because their calves and their legs would lock up on them. But I had an advantage because of all the fighting that I did and all the running that I did. My feet were overdeveloped. So I didn't have problems with my feet and my calves like most people did that weren't used to paddleboarding, because paddleboarding was brand new in 2007. Not a whole lot of people were doing it, and certainly not long distance.
Gotcha. Well,
and at the end of the day, when I was first started working out with the guy that's been with me for like 27 years, he throws the mitts down. He walks up to me. He can barely speak any English, and he starts pointing in my head. He goes, you have to get your mind right. You mind not right, I cannot train you. Fix your mind, I can train you, and storms off. And I was like, whoa, because I literally imported a guy from Thailand to train me. And like one of the first times he trains me, he did that. And I was really good at it. And he's like, you have to get your mind right. And because the mind controls everything. And that's what I help people do. I help people get their minds right. Because if your mind's not right, everything below it's no good.
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there that got to get their mind right. And that was one of my questions I wanted to ask you is, how do you win the battlefield of the mind? And your heart. Let's talk about that, because that's where faith comes in. But
the key to winning is there's two types of warriors. Sun Tzu says there's a warrior that wins in their mind and then goes to the battlefield, and then there's a warrior that goes to the battlefield and hopes to win. Those are the two types of warriors there are. So I learned when I was training in Thailand very early on, every time that I was done running and I was done training, they'd have me throw my arms up and scream a bunch of times, "I'm the world champion. I'm the world champion. I'm the world champion. I'm the world champion." And when I was running, when I was finished running, I would always throw my hands up and go, "I made it. I made it. I made it. I made it." And so I would win in my mind before I went out there. And when I ran across the country when I was 60 in 2022, they said, I would tell them like, "Hey, I already won that thing in my mind. Before I went out there, I had already finished. The finish was done. I was already done. All I had to do was take those steps in between, but I was already done in my mind."
Gotcha.
I won in my mind first, and that's what I work with the athletes on. And I have a whole method to doing that, and it depends on what sport there is, what sport they're in, what challenges that they're going through. But I've come to realize that, and they have to have their heart in the right place, right? There has to be a faith, right, in something greater than yourself. Because if you're doing it for you, you'll quit on yourself very early on.
No doubt. There's a guy in California that I listen to sometimes. He's a pretty smart guy. He's a professor at a university out there somewhere. A guy named Andy Galpin that I think he's been involved in training some fighters. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but
yeah, I have.
One of his recent podcasts, he talked about the foundation. VO2 Max is very important as a foundation for any athlete. Where some of these athletes, more like football players, for instance, short anaerobic activity, kind of got away from. Even like a 300, for instance, 300 shuttle, a 300-yard run. I used to do a lot of those, and I believed in them, for football players. But how do you feel about that? Do you feel like the importance of VO2 Max is something that you've been cognizant of in your training, no matter what you did? Do you think it's foundational to any athlete, even if they're an anaerobic type of athlete? I mean, what's your opinion there?
Well, I do think it's beneficial. I have a whole chapter in my book called The Training and the Trust. But I do think it's very beneficial for that. Now, I'm the only athlete in the world that we've been able to find that not only has had world titles in explosive sports, but holds world records in ultra endurance sports. Normally, an athlete's either one, an endurance sport, or the other, anaerobic, right, an explosive sport. But I'm one of the only ones, or the only one that we can find that's been both. But to your point, yes, I think it's very important that you have that type of endurance in the VO2 Max. Yes, I do. Okay. Even if you're going for short sprints, it sure the heck doesn't hurt, because most of those people that are going for the short sprints, certainly in fighting, are short sprinting for anywhere from 5 to 10 rounds in a row. That's a lot of short sprints back to back,
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. So I was just wondering what's kind of like, what are you doing now? What's your vision like for the next 10 years about what you want to accomplish?
I want to, my next physical event is to paddleboard with a hydrofoil, which is it's a 3-foot mast on the bottom of your board with a fin on it that brings you up on the smaller fin so you can basically have less drag in the water. It's called hydrofoiling. I've wanted to hydrofoil from Texas, Mexico to Key West. That way I'll have circumnavigated the United States on the paddleboard. So that's what I'm up to next athletically. And then I'm getting my brand Quitproof off the ground, where we've written our first book called Becoming Quitproof, but it's set up to be a chicken soup series, meaning that Quitproof for athletes, Quitproof for corporate executives, Quitproof for moms, Quitproof for teens. And then we have my online community called the Trusted Tribe that I'm trying to get off the ground, so that we build a community of people that is a support community for people that are either going through traumatic stuff or have gone through traumatic stuff or aren't going through traumatic stuff and just looking for a community of great people as a support system. Doing in-person events where people come and they spend a weekend with me or a week with me, and we do different, we call them Quitproof quests, which is, either entail like paddleboarding, hiking, or paddleboarding and hiking, contrast therapy and a cold plunge and a sauna and so on. So I'm getting my brand off the ground.
Gotcha. Sounds great.
Yeah. And I mean, the idea is to get a company like Subaru or something to want a Subaru Quitproof, vehicle,
right,
and have their marketing machine blast that everywhere and have people see Quitproof driving around the street, and then come out with like a Quitproof energy drink that's healthy, Quitproof apparel, and so on. So it's a pretty big vision as far as Quitproof goes.
Well, based on your other visions that you made happen, I have, I trust that you will be successful, no doubt about it.
I won't quit.
I hear you. Yeah, and
because the only time you lose is when you quit, Jeff.
That's right.
Other than that, you're in the game, man. If you're in the game, you can win the game. But if you quit, then you lose for sure.
Yeah,
and I think that's what God does, Jeff. I think that's what God gives you, man. He keeps you in the game, and as long as you don't quit on God, you're in the game, man. You're going to win the game.
Absolutely. Well, I'm not going to quit trying to bring people to Christ, and that's why I do this podcast. And so we're going to carry on. And if there's anything I can do to spread the Quitproof program on the Eastern Seaboard, I'd love to do it. I have a lot of guys, tons of guys that did not have a father in the home. Some of them, it didn't impact them as much as others, but some of them it did. Some of them went by the wayside because they they couldn't shake addiction, so they lost their college scholarships and things of that nature, particularly not being able to quit smoking marijuana, which is against the NCAA rules, for instance. So, I'm all about trying to save some people.
That's great. Well, yeah, you can promote my book, Becoming Quitproof. And if you know any athletes that want to up their game, put them in connection with me. If they're willing to commit themselves and work hard with me, sky's the limit, man. How far do you want to go is my question.
Gotcha. I love it, man. I love it.
So those are two things you can do to help me help others.
It's done.
Okay, man. Well, it's been a pleasure, Jeff. I really appreciate.
Yes, we'll close it, but I think I mentioned this to you, and I'm just going to ask if you would offer a prayer for some children under duress out there before we close.
Sure.
And if you wouldn't mind doing that, then we'll go ahead and close it up.
Lord, thank you so much for the blessing of being able to meet with Jeff today and work together with him to do your work. We pray, Lord, that you bless everyone with your wisdom, with your grace, and with your guidance and with your presence, Lord, and especially to the young ones, Lord. Please touch their spirits and bring them blessings and bring them grace and bring them guidance as you have with me. And Lord, please keep working in people like myself and Jeff so that we can use what you have given us to help other people. We pray, Lord, for your guidance and for your blessing. In Jesus' name, we sincerely appreciate you and your son, Jesus Christ. And we pray that we can use the ability that you've given us to help others. And we pray that you lay your hands and your grace on the young kids, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
They all honor, glory, and respect our Lord Jesus Christ, and I hope to be speaking to you sometime in the near future, brother.
Works for me, Jeff. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much.
As well. Thank you.
Join Coach C, USA Strength and Conditioning Hall of Famer and certified health and life coach, every Monday night at 7 for empowering testimonies of faith as diverse individuals from various professions share their personal journey, leading them to spiritual strength through surrendering themselves to Christ. Coach Connors aspires to influence others to choose a healthy threefold lifestyle with spirituality as the powerful foundation.